Okay. All right. Well, nice to meet you. And to start off with, would you like to say your name and where you are, please?
My name is Hope, and I am in Ontario, Canada. At the moment, I am in the town where I live, not where I have my office. That's St. Thomas. And I work in Toronto, Ontario.
Okay. And the first big question is, who are you as a human being? And that can be whatever you'd like to share about yourself, your values, your passions, whatever qualities you feel should come forward.
It is a big question. Who am I as a human being? And I notice how the answer would have changed and still probably changes every day. If you ask me tomorrow, it's a different answer. I'm a human. I'm a wounded healer, probably. I'm a non-binary person, a parent and a grandparent, and a psychotherapist.
Okay. And would you like to say more about parts of yourself or the whole of yourself?
Well, the temptation is obviously talk about the four grandchildren. Like that's like oh, somebody's opening a window for that. Like, yeah, let me talk about Max and Livy and Rafael and so on. But I think it's probably the people that watch this video would be more curious to know about why I say wounded healer, or why I define myself as non-binary, also neurodivergent. Um, so I started my life with an enormous amount of disadvantage. Basically, I am an adoptee. I was a relinquishee. And I landed with a family that couldn't support having a child, because they were themselves too hurt and too unsupported. They didn't have any psychotherapy, like in the situation in which the person that was my adoptive mother was. She would have today, if she would have gone through her experience, which was losing a child at birth, she would have gotten lots and lots of support, and that's such an important part of my journey and my decision to become first a psychologist and then a psychotherapist, because I was her psychotherapist since age 3. Basically, she was telling me the story over and over. She was trying to process. I didn't have language or understanding of what she was doing, but she was telling me on and on and on the story. She was trying to process it in a way, and I wasn't the right person, because that couldn't finish the Gestalt cycle. It would go on and on and on. It wouldn't end. And she was possessed by a level of profound rage and anger. And that anger was taken out on me. I had to go through, I have a lot of compassion for that little girl, because I was beaten up so badly.
Mm.
It was really, really bad. And that, of course, shaped who I am and who I was, and the process of healing all of that. And the fact that I have emotion today about that doesn't mean that I don't have a completely different perspective or a completely different compassion or understanding for what happened to me. It's just that sometimes I connect with that in my heart, even today. And and it's really remarkable that when I work with people that had the same level of wound, it doesn't come up. I just completely give my attention and my presence to them, to support their going through the same trauma again, and this time with support, this time being loved, this time being held, which is at the basis of what I believe is in our kind of therapy. And so, well, these adoptive parents were not really, like, they were not, they because my grandfather was a judge, they were able to jump the queue, and they didn't go through any kind of screen. They wouldn't have been, and it's not an uncommon story for adoptees that somehow a family ends up with a child that they wouldn't have been, allowed to have if they would have been a due process and screening. And that was happening in Uruguay. And in Uruguay, they have a very good institute that does a lot of work in the sense of trying to match the children that don't have a family with families that would like to have a child. But my family didn't go through that. So this incredibly hurt person was able to have a child. And she was never supported in her grief. That made me very curious about unsupported grief and the consequences of it. And that's one of the things I like to write about, because in my generation, and now in Canada, I am seeing it constantly, how people were raised by people that were in the war, and they were also not supported in the grief, because in the case of my mother, her mother and her family decided that the best solution was to tell her, this never happened. You just forget it, make another one, make another child. And that, of course, because of the trauma was so profound, could never happen. She could never get pregnant, even though it was puzzling for everybody because she was physically capable and healthy. And I see the parallels between what we are even doing nowadays with you mentioned before Ukraine, what's happening in Ukraine, the displaced people, the profoundly grieving people that are raising children. What's their availability? What's their possibility to raise those kids? What are we doing? And I know in my body what that can look like. The grief that was never processed, never supported, and the kind of rage and other symptoms. Alcohol was part of the story, and inability to work. It was a complicated situation, and one of my professors in university, she said, you are like Latin America with the contrast, because at home there was often no food, and there was definitely no care. Nobody taught me how to brush my teeth or to tie my shoes or anything like that. But then I would go a few blocks away, and that's where my grandmother would live, and they were very wealthy, and so I would have everything. And she also paid for the school and the private school, so I went to a school where the kids would arrive with a chauffeur sometimes. And the contrast, and then going home and there's no food in the fridge. And that, my goodness, and of course all of that was a huge secret. So all those are the things that contributed to the wounded part. And then, because of the privilege part, I was able to go to university, become a psychologist, and meet my first Gestalt, fall in love with Gestalt in the 80s, meet my first Gestalt teachers and my first Gestalt classmates that were, they were, some of them, like you interview Mariel, I think, Echemendia. I don't think if you interviewed Lydia, but those sisters were for me like they were showing me a kind of love and a life that was like, it could have been from Mars for me, that was so far away from my own family experience. And to this day, I joke like, you had a happy childhood. What's that like? Like, really? Your parents were very supportive all the time. Like, what's that? Like very weird. And
Well,
so
and it's interesting because, it does sound like a microcosm of Latin America, but also Mariel and her sister, having their own immigrant experience and fleeing a dictatorship and being available to
absolutely,
give you that love.
and being politically committed and warriors for justice and all that kind of things. But Mariela and Lydia were my classmates. They were not my teachers.
Ah,
I was in their class to become a Gestalt psychotherapist. And so that I didn't have the benefit until much later in 2012, when I came back from Uruguay because my mother was dying. Until then, I didn't have the experience of having them as therapists, as teachers, as guides, and so on, which was really beautiful. I looked them up right away because I remember them from the time in which we were classmates. And so it's like, that's very dating. And of course they introduced me to Claudio Naranjo and the whole world that Claudio represents in the Gestalt, which nobody here in Canada heard of, which completely shocks me. I felt so alone when I came to Canada. I started in the institute. I met Jay, and Carolina, Tony, and no, they haven't heard of Claudio. And for us, Claudio was like, huge deal.
Mhm.
But there were many other teachers. I emigrated to Austria as well, and I got in touch with the Austrian Gestalt, with the Italian Gestalt a little bit, and I was very eager to learn. I knew that I had to. I was kicked out of that training program. I didn't graduate when in Uruguay in the 80s because I wasn't ready. I really wasn't
Mhm.
ready to graduate and back at the time, I was still struggling too much with my own pain and my own stories, and I hadn't moved ahead enough in order to be available, really, really, really honestly available for a client. I didn't know that. I didn't
Mhm.
even know that. I had no idea. So I go to Austria and I studied there. I meet some I'm a great psychotherapist in Austria. I meet Laura Pels. She was giving weekend workshops in a beautiful place in the mountains in Graz, and that's when I met her. She was quite elderly. I understand that she died a couple of years later only. That was early 90s, I think. And then in 2000 and what was it, 2009, I think it is, I came back to Canada, and I was working as a translator, and I knew that I had to re uh, to study something to have a license. And in
Mhm.
Canada, the education in universities it was completely unaffordable to me. But I had heard from Fernando de Luca in Uruguay about the Gestalt Institute of Toronto. And so I found out, and yeah, that's it. This is home now. And I did the whole 5 years. I
Mhm.
didn't get anything, acknowledged or accredited or anything like that. And I had a beautiful experience of rediscovering Gestalt, rediscovering the Gestalt we work today, relational, embodied, and very, very different from what I knew.
Hmm. So I'm going to go back to a normal question that I asked because you've gone through a lot of different parts.
I do
But
that. I
oh,
don't know
no, that's fine.
if it
I'm
is
not
the
complaining.
ADHD or
I'm
it's
not
just my
complaining.
style that I go one branch after
That's
another, and
okay.
you have to go fetch me.
No problem. So, I mean, you have mentioned a bunch of different moments and experiences in your life, but I'm curious what you would say has been a defining moment. I'm sure there have been many, but what is a defining moment, experience, or set of circumstances that you have lived that you would say really shaped you or redirected you in some way?
As a, I feel inclined to ask you as a person or as a psychotherapist, but it's probably they are so intertwined, right? A defining moment. Yeah, there were many. That's true. Um, Moving to Austria with my family and thinking that, I'm a psychologist, I'm going to be fine, and realizing that I had nothing. I had no degree over there. I had no, I was not allowed to work, and I had no support. I had completely taken for granted the support of the community, the family, the friends. I thought I didn't value that. It was
Mhm.
like really at a certain point, Miriam, the Gestalt therapist from England that talks about race, she talks about fish in the water, the water for the fish. That
Mhm.
was the water for me as a fish, was my community, my family. I thought that they were nothing. I didn't see them. I didn't.
Mhm.
So I thought, well, I go to Austria, I start again. That was quite a shock. And I became very ill. And I struggled with addictions, and I was very sneaky. I never had to be the kind of addict. I I have been in recovery in 12 steps for many years now, but I never was the kind of addict that had to deal with a street dealer, something like that, because I was quite a good diagnostician and quite a good psychologist in the really focus on the pathology of it and the addiction. And so I was lying to the psychiatrist, and I was getting as many pills as I wanted. Sorry, I'm going to cough. And at that time, I was at the zenith of my lack of presence. I was not present to my own experience. I was asleep. I really was. I was trying to dull the pain. It was not a time of growth. It was really, really hard.
And would you say you hit limits of, who you are and who you aren't at that point?
Not even. I don't think so. No. I think that another defining moment was the moment in which I thought that one of my children was suffering from a very visible addiction. My addiction was quite invisible. People from outside, they couldn't tell. They knew that there was something probably awfully wrong with me, but they couldn't tell. And that was when I discovered the Al-Anon family groups, and then I started some rough feedback started to come back, and some realizations started to really land, and it was really hard, and that came the hardest thing, which is the regrets for what I did to them. To this day, even though I think I did a really good job of self-compassion and forgiving myself, to this day, this is hard. What not having there for my children when they needed me the most, when they were little. But I didn't own myself. So I wasn't able to give what I didn't have. I was just a shell. I had to conform with that family that named me Hope. That's my real name. It's not a nickname. They named me Hope because they had, like, it was an avalanche of expectations, and if any of the expectation didn't match what they wanted, well, I had been paid for. I was going to be returned to the orphanage if I didn't do what they wanted, and that was real.
Wow.
And sometimes I feel, well, am I making this up? Was it really that bad? And then, unfortunately, I have to take a look at the person they adopted after me, which is the only sister I ever met, I ever had, and the level of mental health challenges that she experienced shows me that what I went through is real. But at the beginning, we kind of started in the same place with those very, very wounded people.
You've mentioned just now a lot of people and a lot of supports in your life, but who would you say has had the most profound impact on you or influence in your life?
No, that would be very unfair to say one person.
Okay.
That would be it's not one person. There are many, many people.
Okay.
And recently, my supervisors, Joe and Ambrose and Jay. And Jay is a profound teacher. Although I am one of those that, that admire her by far, like that I'm not the one that goes and talks to her after the classes, which she would be totally available to, because I know I see my classmates doing it, but I, for some reason, don't do it. Yeah. And now I am in a supervision group. We are 3, and I have the most enormous gratitude for them, it's so much acceptance and so much room for sharing the most vulnerable, because supervision is the I wish everybody had a supervisor, because it's a place where you can go and say, I really screwed up with this one and it was really bad, and then they will say, well, what did you do? And then they remind you that you actually show up, do the
Mhm.
best you can, and then can let it go. And that's
And
that's
there's,
so
there's
different.
the learning from AA as well is, you can repair damage, you can repair relationships.
You can make amends. The amends piece was at the beginning very painful, and now is more integrated and more spiritual for me.
Well, it's also
So
about responsibility
yes,
and
absolutely taking
self-awareness.
responsibility. Yes,
It's
yes.
not it's not about punishment.
Yeah. No, it's about changing. And if you sometimes you don't have the opportunity to make the amends with the person, but you can also make living amends
Hmm.
and completely turn around the way in which you were relating to a new and much more um, a, a way to relate that includes both of us in the best possible way, in the most loving way.
Hmm.
So that transformation is very, very important, and it's a great teaching. And my partner is in AA for 20 years, and I have a very, very happy marriage these days, and which looks nothing like the original recipe, because I was
Hmm.
telling yesterday a client, I used to have a recipe. I thought that if you do this and this other thing will follow, and then this other good thing will follow, and this is how you do it. And today I really believe I have nothing. I not in the sense, in a negative of sense of I have nothing, but I really have I am closer to that, creative void that we talk about in Gestalt. And I have a client, I always say, and I told her that I tell this piece of her story, which is like she has been um I'm staying in this marriage, I'm leaving this marriage, I'm staying in this marriage, I'm leaving this marriage for a long time. And that I really, really can honestly say that in my body, with all my heart, I don't know the answer. I
Hmm.
really don't. And I can be with her in the journey, but there's no, I have no preference really. And that the more I include that in my own life, like the more I go away from that original recipe, the freer I am. And that therefore the gender expression, right? Like
Hmm.
I moved away from the rigid I remember I was once in Uruguay. I had been for a visit. It was 2016 or something like that. And I look at the back of a woman, and she looked exactly like me. She was a middle-aged woman in positos with the same highlights and so on. And I realized why it was so difficult for me to find my clothing expression and my external expression, is because I was copying completely
Hmm.
what I grew up with.
Hmm.
And that was the beginning of like, well, is there anything else? And the exploration, which continues to this day. And but I knew that this is I'm not a male person. I'm not going to be a female to male trans. But that femininity that I used to copy, because it
Hmm.
wasn't mine. I was in drag. Um, that's not me either.
Hmm.
So that's possible when we step into the space in which creation is possible.
I think that's the very clear difference between hope and expectation, right?
Yes, that's such a
Possibility.
lovely thing. I will use that. I was named Hope, but I should have been named Expectation instead.
Hmm.
Yes,
Hmm.
that's true. That was the thing. Like there was a plan for my life from the
Hmm.
very beginning.
Instead of
But now I
possibility.
am exploring the biology piece. I am ready. I'm ready. And people very kindly, my ex-husband very, very kindly, he says, like, I'm moved by his sweetness. He said, like, at your age, there's no much of a hope that you are going to find anybody. And I said, maybe not a parent, but I may find siblings.
Hmm.
Who knows?
So you're beginning that part of looking for the biological family of origin? Wow.
Yes, I started that years ago, but they have such a backlog in the institutes that take care of that in Uruguay that they haven't. They interviewed me right away. They took my information and so on, but I think I recently follow up and they told me we are working on the files from 2018. So that's what officially can happen. And maybe I am in all the DNA places and, you know, who knows?
Ancestry.com and
All of
mhm.
them. I paid for all of those. And
Wow.
in North America, you have a really good chance. But in South America, Latin America, they don't use them that much. So it's, but there is a beautiful project in Uruguay that uh, creates kind of a poster for adoptees. And they
Hmm.
say, well, you are looking for family.
Hmm.
Do you remember if your aunt or your grandmother or whatever had a child in that
Hmm.
hospital? Blah blah blah. And often people come through and they respond and they say
Well,
yes.
it's, I mean, with so many stolen children, illegally adopted
Oh, the
children.
desaparecidos, my
Yeah,
goodness.
yeah.
But
No, there's
they had way more information about the whole past and the whole biological side. Well, for my family, it was incredibly important to erase all of that. It was
right.
really part of their own lack of support, of lack of knowledge. It was
Hmm.
really, really important to erase that. They
Wow.
to the point, and that I am only now recovering from that erasure because to the point in which I was in one of those encuentros, one of those weekend things that are very intense with Mariela and Lydia, and the first exercise was do a family tree. And I draw my little
Ah.
family tree, and I draw my little family tree very nice. I was very happy because it was very balanced and the squares were almost the same size. And I show it to them. And then second part of the exercise is you step in the front of the group and you explain who your family is. And very calmly and completely self-possessed, I explain to the family. And then Lydia looks at me like, isn't there anybody missing there? And I am like, no, I don't think so. And isn't anybody missing there? And I was not getting it. And then finally they got tired and the facilitator says like, and your biological parents? And I go,
Ah.
oh, well,
Hmm.
talk about a defining moment. Like that's when I really realized how much they had been completely obliterated from my consciousness.
Well,
It was a
it's that
daily, it was a
it's that
daily exercise.
official interjected story.
That the interjected story. They work very hard on an interjected story. They gave me a date of birth, and then when I discovered that I was adopted at around 14, because I was impossible. I was a little criminal. I was stealing. I was lying. I was out of control. And finally, somebody told them, you have to tell her. You have to tell this child that they are adopted. And when they told me, they had created a whole story, and one of the things that they told me as a very loving thing, and they said it like talk about like a blind spots or things that are imperceptible to us, the famous shadow from Jung. They told me very lovingly, your life started the day you came to this house, which for them was a loving thing to do. And for me, it's like,
But it's like you
that's
said, it's completely
horrific.
esquisante. It just denies your entire reality.
My whole biology, my whole is erased completely. The existence of the person that carried me for 9 months, unimportant. The whatever else I had, completely erased.
Hmm. Wow. And when I hear you speak, I'm thinking about the difference between having somebody else erase part of your story or your experience, and then in a totally different area of your life, being able to safely deconstruct parts of your identity and choosing to
Yes.
do that with freedom.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
quite the
But there's a
swing.
lot of support needed internally, a lot of, I need to be very grounded to do that exploration.
Hmm.
And I feel I am. I notice, like talking to you, I got emotional and so on. But the truth is that I feel that I have my feet firmly on the ground these days about who I am. And
Hmm.
that is such a, is right sized. It's not, it's serene. It's not like I'm great or I am nothing.
Hmm.
It's just ease and it's
Hmm.
grounded and can stay. And I'm happy with the life I have.
And
But I have
mhm,
space to find those things. I have
mhm,
space for that search.
mhm. Well,
And
and I think
sometimes,
I would ask you then, how do you experience, it's a complicated and very complex thing, I know, but how do you experience power and privilege in your life? Because it sounds like you've had and not had those in many different configurations.
yeah. Well, I used to think of myself as extremely privileged for because of the educational opportunities that I have. But when you go back to that child that was abandoned, probably because of poverty, because of not, who knows? And I was left in the crib in the hospital, and then that mother that just had given birth disappears, and I end up in an orphanage. That doesn't sound very privileged, and it's very basic. And also, as an immigrant, the opportunities that I don't have to, to be, I had all these, a whole bunch of degrees that I got in other countries, and I had to start from scratch here in Canada. And to this day, I feel that I have a lot to share in terms of uh, my, I want to use very, very gently and very respectful the word wisdom, because it's something I carry in my body and because of my age and my experiences. And I see that other people that don't have the same, that they are like 25 and they finish university in the right university and they are known by the professors as a bright person, they get invited to give a chat at a conference about the subject that I know much better, but nobody invites me. And so
Hmm.
in that sense, there is the experience of the immigrant, which is, so many of us are living in this country, which in many ways welcomes immigrants, that has, I don't think in this country there is a huge problem to have a heavy accent. Most of us do. And just as far as we can communicate, and people don't assume, like in other countries. I sometimes went to the States, and they hear me speak, and I remember once I was in a taxi and I was going to a fancy restaurant in Ohio, and because my partner was in a conference, and I was alone, and I was going to have some dinner, and the taxi driver assumed immediately that I worked there, that I was perhaps the cleaning lady or something, just because of the accent. That doesn't happen in Canada. I never had that experience in Canada. And but even if that's true, that they are welcoming and accepting and so on, there are still opportunities that are just not there for me.
Well, I mean, they're welcoming and accepting. I'm sorry, I'm Canadian. In the discourse,
I didn't know that. I thought
I
you were
was born.
Mexican.
I was born in Canada, but I've been in Mexico for 21 years. But it's unbelievable to me that the person is welcome, and all of this discourse about accepting and equality, but your documents are not welcomed. And you are welcome to become an entry level cleaning lady, but you're not welcomed as a graduate level psychologist.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's not true. It's not true at all that there's
No,
equality and openness.
and my I am a clinical psychologist with a lot of experience in I was assistant to the director in rehab clinics and so on. And here I am not a psychologist. Not that I want to be a psychologist. It's fine being a therapist, but it was a 6 years career, and here they acknowledge it as a bachelor. And
Hmm.
and to be a psychologist in Canada, you need to have a PhD. And I do have a doctorate from England, but that is a research thing that doesn't count for anything. I didn't even bother. And yeah, it's like this. And but I felt that it was for me the most growth provoking choice was to just just do what I needed to do.
Hmm.
And many people give up, and I don't blame them. Many people are doctors here and they're driving Uber or whatever,
Yep.
because they say like it's unsurmountable what we need to do. And I am,
Hmm.
or they tell me, and it's funny because they tell it to me. They say like, well, I am 40 years old. What do you want me to do? And I think of myself at 57 starting the Gestalt Institute of Toronto, and it was a beautiful thing. I don't mind. I really don't mind, because to be honest, the Gestalt today, that compared to the Gestalt I did in 1986 in Uruguay, they don't have a lot in common, and I prefer to be part of this community today than that person. That was the power, like you say, the power imbalance was very, very big. I remember my therapist once told me, you have to lose weight. Just
Oh,
like
do
that.
I?
He just told me like just like that, and it was an intervention that was acceptable.
Wow.
And it was a male therapist,
Hmm.
and a very famous one, by the way. And
Hmm.
and he says like, no, you have to lose weight, and you have to do this, and you have to do that. And I don't remember when was the last time that anybody used those words in our kind of
Hmm.
Gestalt. We are exploring, we are asking, we're inviting. Everything is an invitation, nothing is an imposition. And I continuously check, was that shaming?
Hmm.
How did that land for you, what I just said? And I ask for permission.
Hmm.
Is it okay if I challenge you a little bit? So a very different Gestalt, a very different Gestalt. That Gestalt much more who I used to be. The
I mean, I don't deny the opportunities for learning, but I still, it's a very big issue for me. I get it's very insulting. I couldn't be a therapist in Canada because my degree is Mexican. And I very much agree with what you said of, the people who start at the top level of privilege and have a very short, straight line to those good schools, high-paying jobs, easy social connections. They miss the depth that, having to go all the way back down and then start again and all the way back down. I mean, we might get back up there at some point, but
mm,
that process, when it's not a straight line, it's so much richer than the easy, flat, superficial path,
mm.
honestly.
The that recipe, by the way, doesn't work for everybody. My specialty, the people that I work most with, are neurodivergent, and specifically autistic people, people with other kind of challenge in there, and very, very traumatized people, because I can, right? Like not everybody can.
Mhm.
And I noticed that even though they had all the opportunities and so on, they just can't, because they don't have the support in the functions that they would, in the way, in the shape in which they could use
Mhm.
it. And very often they are very puzzled and very, very frustrated, because they are unbelievably bright. They are
Mhm.
gifted people. They have so much to offer. And 1 in 5 only is employed in Canada, in today's Canada. Of
Mhm.
autistic people, 1 in 5 have a job. The
Mhm.
rest are being supported by the family or ODSP, ODSP is sheer poverty, right? Like at 1,000 for us in Canada when a one-bedroom apartment is 2,700. It's all over the news, like the absurdity of the cost of our
Mhm,
housing, right?
mhm. So
So
when you mentioned your own neurodiversity, can you say more about what you mean?
that's another thing that maybe in Gestalt there is I can't find too much of a home for, which is I have ADHD. I know that my nervous system and my brain operate at a different way, and I learn to love myself and support myself through that. I
Mhm.
have a pair of glasses in every table almost in my house, and that's fine. And I never know where there's a pen. That's also
Mhm.
fine. And I support myself very rigidly with my appointments. I use a very rigid calendar system that will not impact my clients so that I can show up for the appointments. Otherwise, it would be terrible. And I have that like I still have some kind of alarm, like may I forget something, because that's how my brain works. And the sweet, the the gestalty way for Jay, for instance, for my teachers, he said like you're just a space cadet, like you are just a scatterbrain. But which is nice not to have a pathology, but on the other hand, to know that my brain is different, that my nervous system is different. And there is a lot of questionings because, as you know, Gabor Mate is one of the people that says like, yeah, that's trauma. That was created by the trauma. And I did a master's degree in neurocriminology in the University of Valencia, and I learned how the brain of an abused child changes. If you compare
Mhm.
the brain of a child that is in a normal family where they are loved, supported, and the brain of a person that has been abused are different. And so
Mhm.
part of that could be the trauma, but there is something that is called ADHD that exists in my life, and it has been helpful to know that that's a thing.
Well, it's not pathologizing when it's descriptive. And I do identify as a neurodiverse individual, and I work with a lot of clients within neurodiversity. And just being able not to have it dismissed as being scatterbrained or whatever, but actually understanding having some curiosity about, okay, how does your brain work? How do you function? What are your patterns? Because they are different.
And especially, what are your strengths and
Mhm.
where do you need more support? For me,
Yeah.
that's the basis of
And
my
and
neurodiversity
what
assessment.
kind of support?
What kind of support you need?
Because you might
And
not
it's
need a disability check that won't pay your rent. You may need a specific adaptation to be able to do all of the wonderful things you're capable of.
exactly, I couldn't have said that better. Absolutely. You just need the support to function in the world that is disabling to you.
Mhm.
You are disabled, like autistic people are disabled, not because of intrinsically, but because the society model disables them. Like
Yeah,
and I always
disabled in a neurotypical society, yes, but that doesn't
exactly
mean. Mhm.
that in a society that was congruent with your needs, you wouldn't be disabled. But in this society, you are disabled. You asking certain things from you, that's never going to fly. And we are still working with what happened in the pandemic, right? Like in the pandemic when certain things were removed and
Mhm.
all that pressure disappeared and all that uh, taken for granted stuff disappeared. Many of us we discover who we really are and what our real needs are, and we started to become more like a, oh my gosh, working from home is amazing. I don't have these bright lights, those sounds, the scents, the noise, the this, the that.
Well,
I
even
feel
just
like
the schedule, I don't have to be in the place at the time, sitting still in the damn chair.
after going in a bus that is complete torture for me because they
Hmm.
are the noise, the pressure, that oh gosh. And
Hmm.
so we and the beautiful sentence is like, you told me that wasn't possible, but the pandemic showed it's possible.
Well, because it was always possible for a lot of
It
people, it
was
was
always
not possible
possible.
for others. Wasn't
They didn't
possible for
want to
others.
give it to you.
Hmm.
They just want to, and that takes us to the most cruel and horrible thing, which is that when children are forced to accommodate and be less of a problem for you rather than to develop what's magical about them
Hmm.
and to support that and celebrate it, which is still the model. I was in George Brown working in a placement in a beautiful program that supports everybody and incredibly inclusive with my supervisors, with Joe and Ambrose, and even in that college, the program about autism is ABA, which is the community is so full of stories about and even philosophically or spiritually, what right is
Which
awful.
speaks a lot more to the limitations of the supportive care workers than it does to the limitations of the people who are seeking the services.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mm.
But there are a lot of tragic things still happening.
Mhm. Mm. Mm. And you've mentioned a couple of times sort of where you are chronologically in life.
Yeah, I'm
How
in my
how is this
60s.
for you? How is that for you? How's the aging process, your experience of time and the passing of life?
Well, obviously, I have much less life ahead of me than the one that I already lived. But I used to be suicidal, profoundly suicidal, and I belong to several adoptees communities, and I understand that for people that were in orphanages, it's not uncommon because experiencing in our own bodies the closeness of I am going to die is so familiar. That feeling is familiar of like giving up and just like, will somebody come and hold me? Will somebody come and feed me? Will somebody come and, or maybe I will just stay in this bed and die.
Mm.
And I had periods in my life, long periods in which I was suicidal. And for me, the biggest exciting and wonderful thing is that I am not suicidal and I am looking forward to several things in life. And even, I'm thinking of opening up more things professional. And I have a friend with whom we have a little bit of a dream of starting an academy for transpersonal psychology and transpersonal gestalt. I remember I wrote little papers and I complained to my teachers like, Gestalt used to be transpersonals. We forgot about that piece. Like that's not there. And now everybody's talking about psychedelics and everybody's talking about that. And so where's the training? And so I have a little dream of that even now. So I'm looking forward to that happens. If that happens and if that doesn't happen, I still will be happy. But I really look forward to getting to know my grandchildren as older young people, and I am more excited about the future than I ever have been. So for me, the excitement about the future and the looking forward is not at all related with the biology and the age. Is
Mm.
related to my own well-being and my own being happy now.
Mm.
I can't wait. I really can't wait. I see a grandchild that is 8 or something like that with an elderly grandmother, and I look at them and oh, that will be me. I will be there with Libby, and I will be crossing the street, and we will go to the candy store with Libby, and I am even probably going to be a little bit younger than they because Libby is 2 now. So when I'm 70, and so I look at the people that are 70, and I like, oh, that is nice. I'm going to be 70 and then I'm going to be 80 like this other person. I'm going to be 80 like Lily Tomlin, not 80 like I don't imagine myself in another situation, but active and happy, and that's what I imagine, and because I can.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. That's exciting.
I find it very exciting. I
Mhm.
have a little bit of envy of the other grandparents because they are retired. And I have a little bit of envy of that. Like, oh, they went to the museum on a Monday morning. I had 5 clients on that
Mhm.
same Monday morning. But yes, it's like, it's just a pinch because I
Mhm.
still have I have the possibility, and I know that I have something to offer that they don't.
Well,
I
I think that's a magical thing about Gestalt grandparents. I mean, we might mess up our kids, but by the time we get to the grandchildren,
We have the wisdom.
we have accumulated some learning from our
Yes,
experiences. And also just even, the fact that you're not sitting there stamping papers and counting money.
or
I mean,
knitting.
what you're doing
Yeah,
with human beings it's a very transferable skill as a grandparent,
absolutely, absolutely,
as a
absolutely.
parent
And
too, but
I trust that my children will drive their kids a tiny little bit crazy, just a little bit crazy enough that they are going to come and ask me, and I will have all this love to offer about them, about their parent.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's exciting. And I also do adventurous things still at 63. I go to Burning Man every year, and
Okay.
I know,
Mhm.
and I'm part of that crowd. It's working man for me because I kind of work as a counselor when I'm there. But I get to witness the most creative and more, you know, utopic uh, experiences. And I went. They paid me to go to Africa recently to be a counselor in the Africa burn, and
Yeah.
yeah, it's there's so much, and
Hmm.
I celebrate. I dream all my life of doing the famous ayahuasca ceremony, and recently during the pandemic, I landed in Mexico, and I had the opportunity to be with the shamans and do the famous, and that's when I really started to feel in my body the experience of being a baby. I
Hmm.
experienced it for the first time. I had access to my being a baby, kicking like a baby, being on my back, and experiencing the profound abandonment. Like there was no one there. There was no one there. And once I could experience that, it was like a leap.
Mhm.
So much more was possible after experiencing that, which
Mhm.
speaks to the value of the embodied experiences, the real somatic healing of therapy, not just talk. So
Would you say you were able to support yourself at the same time in that? No?
no, but I survived.
Mm.
So there was a part of me that really, really wanted to leave.
Mm. Mm. And so what about the Gestalt world or Gestalt in itself speaks to you? What did you find there for yourself?
The first attraction was the non-intellectual piece, because in Uruguay, in the early 80s, when I started studying, it was psychoanalytical. So it was all about Freud, which
Right.
helped me later to understand certain things. It's not like all of it, throw away everything. No, there was a lot. And so when Fernando de Luca, who was the teacher at the time, came and presented Gestalt, I was instantly interested. There was something for me that I couldn't even name. And then I learned about, Fried's journey and the Buddhism and so on. To this day, I'm fascinated by the Eastern contribution to psychotherapy, and throughout my life, I look for different teachers that were more that had offerings in that sense, that were more that they were more integrative. That they Gestalt has taken from here and there and there and there and made a new beautiful thing, and a new beautiful creative thing. But there is the always the background of accepting and staying with what is in the here and now, not trying to go anywhere, but just stay in the here and now together. And what can emerge from that? And the phenomenology of, like, I notice this little tiny thing with respect and with reverence. I don't think I have heard of this in a long time, but I read in the early Gestalt books about how the Zen piece of the Gestalt was observing the flower, the beauty of the flower, without wanting to pluck it, without wanting to change it, without, like, just observing, which was the phenomenological piece. And then the glorious, most beautiful part, which is the Buber piece of the I and Thou, and we are, like, the reverence that I feel in the presence of another human being that is completely contradictory with the objectifying and the all the othering and the making you so separate from me and my patient. Don't use patient, the word, and so much. And then the creativity, the integrating the I love theater and improv and role playing and all of that. Now with this online business, I'm still finding my footing in that. I feel I can do it so much better in person, but still there's stuff possible that the storytelling, the the like the not tell me about the elephant, be the elephant, and then speak in first person about, like, experiments and the hot seat, and so many tools. The Gestalt offers so many tools, and it depends on who you are and what resonates with you. We can be completely different Gestalt therapists, and we can all be really, really good for the right person and the right situation. So I
And
don't
we can
think
be
there's
very different with different clients too.
yeah. Oh, that too. Like, and completely different, like unrecognizable, depending on who the client is. And I don't think there is any other school of psychotherapy that offers all that richness, all that variety. I don't think. When you reduce Gestalt psychotherapy, it may look like person-centered, or it may look like another talk therapy, or it may look like,
Yeah, I mean,
but
it has common factors and.
yes, but there's so much more, and so much more learning, so much more. It's like a huge, glorious garden full of things that you can admire, explore, and take home whatever you want. So it's unique in that way. Gestalt is by
And I'm
far.
curious about whether you feel like you're part of a Gestalt community and on what levels, because when I hear, I've trained from South America to Europe to North America to here to there to this to that. Do you feel that you have a sense of belonging and community, or what is your experience?
I do have a certain sense of belonging to the Gestalt Institute of Toronto.
Okay. And beyond that,
But
the sense of community, does that mean anything to you?
no. The Gestalt conference and so on, I would go there and I wouldn't know anybody. And well, even if I learned with some people, but I was one person in a big group. Or if I go even in Uruguay, I would go, but and they know me, they know who I am, but no, we didn't keep in touch at all. So I want to go to a conference in Uruguay, but I know I would be just one more participant, a completely anonymous person, except for the part in which somebody says, "Oh, you're here! I'm so happy you're here," and they hug me. But apart from that, they really don't know who I am. So, but I'm one of the many, many people that was touched by the magic of Gestalt, and that is a sense of community.
Well, I mean, it may not make you stand out and be universally recognizable, but I don't think that sounds like your goal. So I
No,
am curious, what you see yourself doing going forward, or what projects you're holding now. Like, what do you want to do with Gestalt or beyond it?
I think I want to integrate more the piece about working with the creative and gender exploring neurodivergent folks through a Gestalt lens,
Mhm.
because I don't hear much about that. I know you do something, I saw it in your page, but I don't think I have read anything in anywhere about that. And I think it's part of it is the fear of the pathologizing, that there is a big misunderstanding in the sense like my daughter would say something like I would say like, yeah, I think that person is autistic, and my daughter would be horrified and say, you are diagnosing something. And for me, that's not a diagnosis, that's an identity. It's like you would say, this person is gay, and oh, you're pathologizing a person, you're telling them they are gay.
You're
Nobody would
labeling.
say
Mhm.
that.
I'm
But if I
describing. I'm not labeling.
but if I'm
Mhm.
saying autistic, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, that's insulting for the people that have children that don't speak, or they are not, which again is a huge misconception, which is that if you are nonverbal, you are intellectually
Yeah.
somehow underdeveloped or something. It's completely huge misconception.
Mhm.
But so I would like to bring that to the Gestalt work.
Mhm.
My work with every single day with these magical neurodivergent folks, and their struggles, and the support they need, and how they are finding their way.
Mhm.
So that's beautiful. That's so great.
I
And the
think that's.
trauma that we
Mhm.
inflicted on them, and we keep inflicting on them, and so some awareness to that piece too, right? Like,
Mhm. Well, I think that's part of the limitations of the institutionalized psychotherapy structures. They're
yeah,
neurotypical. They're, hetero, cis, normative, blah, blah, blah. And any of the genderqueer, kink, diverse, anything.
which are have a huge overlap. The Venn diagram there is like a
Yes.
yeah, because
But
it's
I think
oh,
I think
what
it's
do they
the
have
issue.
these people in common? They are creative.
Mhm.
They
Well,
don't
and I think the
conform.
interesting thing is, if that normative, let's just say,
Yeah,
not normal, but if that normative,
conforming. Yeah,
small, exclusive power structure holds its stability, I mean, enough of us as outsiders are standing now outside of that structure. We can look around and we're not alone.
yeah,
You could be like, oh, there's like a critical mass of people now who are excluded. And so I mean, the balance is almost shifting, where
yeah.
there's more happening outside than on the inside of some of those typical academic power holding colonial whatever structures. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for that now.
I think so. And also the other thing I think about is all these, like 4 out of 5 people in this community, in the neurodivergent community, are not don't have the possibility to express themselves through work. They don't have jobs
So
or any work.
you don't have a sense of belonging, of meaning, of purpose, of
Purpose, yes, and now I am starting to think how important that is. So maybe a project around
Mhm.
that the not of creating the awareness of the what they are missing. It's like if
Mhm.
in an ecosystem that we say, well, okay, let's eliminate all the turtles, because who wants any turtles? Like, we don't need them, and or whatever it is an ecosystem, and it's a neurodiversity in terms of humanity is as rich and full of possibility as biodiversity.
Mhm.
So that if we could only start there. So some work in that direction really inspires me.
You can tell. Hmm.
So we will see if we can bring something to the Gestalt world.
Hmm. I look forward to that.
Thank you. Thank you, Heather.
Oh. And I'm curious, sort of wrapping up the conversation. I'm happy to
Yeah.
start getting to know you. I'd be excited to get to know you more. But what else do you feel like you would like to bring to this conversation?
I don't know. I had no plan and I really rambled all over the place.
No, you did.
And I went and I
It
allowed
was a
myself
nice
to be
walk. It wasn't a st
there's an art. And I allowed myself to become emotional and to be emotional with you. And when that was happening, I was like, would I mind if my clients see that? And then the answer is no. I
I think
really,
it's
really
incredibly relatable for
is
people.
human, is humanity,
Mhm,
is the pain of humanity and the joys of humanity and the and also I really like that I reclaim the name hope that I used to care that used to hate because sometimes I say, well, I am hope and I am because I went through a lot and I'm here
mhm,
and I'm looking forward to the next
mhm,
step.
mhm. Oh, hmm. Well, does this feel like an okay place to end our conversation for now? I'm very grateful for your time and
Thank
your
you, Heather.
openness and your freedom in what you shared.
Thank you so much. Yes, for sure. I think this is a really good time.
Okay. Well, thank you.